Are you ready to embark on a journey of success? To discover your true potential in the untold stories of careers in life sciences? Welcome to PATHFINDER by the Purdue Institute of Inflammation, Immunology and Infectious Disease. With your host, Tommy Soares, discover the untold stories of industry scientists and unveil the secrets to excelling in your career. Thank you for joining us once again, and remember to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. Welcome, everybody. My name is Tommy Soares. I am the Director of Scientific Strategy and Relations for the Purdue Institute of Inflammation, Immunology and Infectious Disease. And today on Pathfinder, I have the pleasure of welcoming Chris Pulliam, a Purdue chemistry graduate, currently holds the position of senior scientist at Procter & Gamble, where he employs a unique blend of measurement science and data science to tackle complex challenges. With a specialized focus on understanding chemical composition and material performance, Chris excels at generating innovative insights. In the autumn of 2022, Chris embarked on a new venture, launching his YouTube channel. On his platform, he offers valuable Python tutorials and career guidance aimed at fellow measurement experts looking to seamlessly integrate data science into their workflows. Chris completed his PhD in analytical chemistry at Purdue University in 2017 with a thesis entitled Mass Spectrometry Anywhere. Presently, he resides in Los Angeles, California, supporting his wife as she completes her pediatric surgery fellowship. Welcome to the program, Chris. Thank you so much for coming on. And I am so glad that we finally got to make the connection with you after interviewing your brother and realizing that you were also connected to him. This was a mind-blowing thing for me. And I said, oh my gosh, I got to get to Chris also. So thank you. Thank you so much for being part of the show.
Thank you for that introduction. Yeah, I was excited. I saw that interview and I saw a few others, and I'm like, man, this is a really cool way to sort of put the science in context. Let folks see what happens after your time at Purdue and your time, particularly in the STEM fields. So I'm excited to have this conversation today. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. I'm a big admirer of your show too. And man, it's so awesome to see how much value you bring with every single one of your episodes, because you're really like empowering people with tools, empowering people with tips and guidance. And I don't know, but like it must feel so awesome to be able to know that you're helping so many people on your channel.
Yeah, it was it was a scary adventure at first. I
Yes.
recall I started the channel around October 2022, and I started because I had gone on this long upskilling journey at work.
Mm.
I graduated from Purdue, Dr. Cook's lab, and my thesis was mass spectrometry anywhere. And then I joined Procter and Gamble when my wife moved to Cincinnati. And on that team, there were a bunch of PhD mass spectrometry experts. And so I was just one of those experts looking for a way to add something new to the team. They already covered GCMS, LCMS, high res, triple quad, time of flight, you name it. They had it and they had expertise. And so I realized that there was a space in this data area, area where we could actually bring more insight and understanding. And so I went on an upskilling journey that laid a lot of the groundwork for data science, programming, computer-based analysis. And one of the outages I observed was there was not a lot of content with how you do this with analytical data, the nuances of IR data or mass spec data. And so I could bring that piece to my own education because I already had that expertise, and then wanted to democratize that, and has definitely found an interesting community of folks who are keenly interested in this particular cross section between measurement science and data science.
That's so awesome. What a niche, eh? What a like, oh, I like laser focus, and like look at what happened. You found a community of interested scientists that are also in this area. I'm, like, I'm so interested to learn what was the inspiration for you to say, well, I better be better at this data piece. And I understand. Okay, so you saw an opportunity because so many of your colleagues knew about the different areas of mass spectrometry, and you saw this as again, maybe as a niche. Maybe niche is going to be a good word for this interview. But like, you found this gap that nobody was covering, and you said, "Oh, I'm gonna now start learning Python. I'm gonna start learning data management, data sciences, and so on." And that elevated you into this journey, propelled you into this journey.
Yeah, so I started at Procter and Gamble as a postdoc, and my postdoc project was to compare various botanical extracts. So, for instance, how does ginger, an aqueous extract of ginger, compare to an organic extract of ginger?
Mm.
And in that case, we saw they were really similar. Like if we overlay those LCMS chromatograms, if you look at the analytical data, it overlapped quite a bit compared to other botanicals like black cumin. If those were, if we were to do the same comparison, aqueous versus organic, they did not overlap one bit.
Mm.
And that's just two A/B tests. My project involved 15 botanicals, and I could see how moving forward they would extend this study because we're delivering a lot of insight. And so I wanted to develop a language that allowed us to sort of articulate or measure how similar or different these botanicals or these fingerprints were, knowing that right now it's for botanicals, but tomorrow it could be for performance testing of Bounty, or it could be for competitive product analysis of our material versus some other raw material. And so the what comes next to me was obvious, but the journey to the upskilling to have that piece was the challenge, particularly when I knew how to run experiments. I knew how to interpret analytical data. I knew how to physically look at these data and tell you what I see and what's there and what's not there and what could be there. I had to then convince myself that these tools that I would develop, these algorithms that I would either implement or develop myself, would come to the same conclusion. So there was a lot of double effort. There was solve these problems the traditional way, and then there was solve these problems this other way and figure out, are we getting some congruence in the ideas? So for instance, if we showed that these chemical fingerprints overlapped, then we expect whatever metric we would use to quantitate to say these are similar, be it distance, be it similarity, be it correlation. And that worked really well. And when it didn't work was actually a new area of insight. And so we were able to really begin understanding these botanical materials really, really well, far better than many others in our industry, because we had high-end analytical capability matched with data science. The next piece was then to, I could speak that language, but how do I then use this knowledge of analytical to convey that message back to my team, who are used to that traditional communication, that traditional analysis? So a lot of effort, but definitely well worth that process. And now we're all better as far as innovators having this conglomeration of talent on the team.
You know what's so impressive though, and like I want everybody who is watching this interview who is a Pathfinder fan to really go take a look at your program and your YouTube channel, because I see like you are really into experimental design and statistics, and like you are a true like purist in like anything that is the scientific method. And it's so awesome to see in your channel. I just want everybody to go and take a look. But like, where do you get that? You must love stats. You must love
I do.
statistics. Yeah.
I love all of the innovation process, particularly this intersection between the chemistry and the measurement aspect. So when I went to Purdue for undergrad, and I joined Hilke Kentema's lab.
Mm.
And I joined the lab in particular because at the time I was still between organic chemistry and analytical chemistry. I knew I would be going to grad school. I didn't know for what yet. And her lab had both. That's somewhat uncommon in analytical chemistry, especially to be great at both fields. And so from my undergrad research, I I found myself gravitating towards the measurement aspect of it. I loved just the complex signals and then trying to interpret and taking what we learned from in at Purdue classes, Analytical 321, and trying to then put that into real context when you're at the cutting edge of what's actually known. And then getting to the point where in my dissertation work, I had an opportunity to do an internship at Genentech. And that opportunity really changed my thesis. So the first half of my graduate work in Graham's lab or Professor Cook's lab was rapid in situ chemical analysis. How quickly can we make this measurement where the measurement needs to be? So we've partnered with Dow and have gone to agrochemical fields where they were looking at pesticide dispersion. We partnered with L'Oreal and actually went to perform a clinical trial in India. So we can actually measure how the squalene on the skin is affected by UV oxidation and thus could demonstrate the effectiveness of sunscreen.
Yeah.
And then when I was at Genentech, I was doing mass spec imaging. And the idea of my summer project was to help them understand how these particular APIs or drugs were degrading. But as part of my experience, I was allowed to go to virtually any research seminar that they had on campus. And there was one where, as a side comment, one of the scientists had mentioned the inability to track their reactions in real time without stopping the reactor. So they'd have these huge reactors or they'd have their pilot plants. And in order to know where the reaction was, they'd have to stop it, break the seal, take a sample out, either run it in MR, or they keep it enclosed, but then they can only do like pH or flow rate or viscosity and those sorts of things. So I'm like, wait a second. I've got an instrument I've taken virtually everywhere you'd take an instrument. Why don't I take it to the organic synthesis lab? And in fact, what if we start monitoring these chemical reactions? And because my instrument can measure so quickly, what if I monitored multiple reactions at the same time and I'm just switching between reactions? And that idea landed with some interesting IP, a great publication, and became the bulk of my thesis work. But what also came from that was the ability, the need to process complex data. So now I've got all these, I'm tracking 6 reactions over a 2-hour time period. The data was incredibly complex. And admittedly, I lacked the skills to process that data. And I tried to learn, and I was getting it slowly, but the project had a timeline. And so I relied on one of my colleagues, Dalton Snyder, to write me some code to help process the data and make it feasible, make it actually publishable. And when I recognized that opportunity at P&G, hey, I've got another opportunity to learn how to program, to process the data, to make it interpretable, to scale it, to drive the impact, I didn't pass it up. And it was these sorts of things where like this intersection between measurement science and data science just continued to collide. And eventually I recognized the pattern. I recognized that to be at the cutting edge of measurement science and to try to find things that you didn't know were there or take on more complex problems, you need a way, at least in some cases, to recognize patterns in the data or to abstract some other representation of that information. And if I'm seeing this and experiencing this, other folks have to be. And so that is kind of what helped precipitate my learning journey personally, and then my teaching journey as I have taken a bold step, as you have, and decided to leverage the internet to scale a message of what's possible in your career, as well as what you can do with data and chemistry and all those other aspects.
I love that, man. I think that's exactly it. And it's so incredible to hear the flow of how you ended up really going after what seemed to be a challenge, right? Like you tried it once and it's just like, oh, okay, prof, can you help me write the code? And like, but then you saw the opportunity to challenge yourself one more time and really do it and get into it. And like that is an incredible and like inspiring account of like, yes, go after your challenges because that's where you're going to feel the best of yourself, right? Giving your best. And I think that's great. Was it Was there any inspiration? I mean, you mentioned Graham Cooks and what an incredible person to be working with. Was there other inspirations also around you, other mentors that were in your life at that time that you could say, yeah, man, they really embarked me here? Who was the prof again that you said wrote the code for you?
It was actually a fellow graduate student, Dalton Snyder.
Oh, okay.
So, it's interesting because I there's people who help at various stages of my career. I think the earliest I would have to say, far before. So let me take a step back. I knew I wanted to be a scientist in the fourth grade. I was in Indianapolis, Spring Mill Elementary School, and in the cafeteria they had a scientist. I don't know what kind of scientist he was, but he did something that blew my mind that made me want to learn science. And it was a simple experiment, and all he did was make smoke.
Yes.
He showed how you can affect the pressure to change these water droplets to now appear as clouds in the cafeteria. I'm like, how do you make clouds indoors in this cafeteria, in this setting that he was usually used to eat, make messes, talk, catch up? And he did science in a way that I'm like, I didn't know you could do this.
Right.
And from fourth grade through today, I have not looked back on science. In seventh grade, I was in math before we switched from Washington Township to Pike Township, and I was not doing well. I knew I wanted to be a scientist since fourth grade, and math was not, I don't know what it was. I could not figure it out, but before the semester was over, I was looking like a C or a D in math. I'm like, this is not going to get me a science career. Whatever science is, I'm still sorting that out. And my teacher at the time, Miss Real, said something that really changed how I view my learning process. And she said, at least you're consistent. And I was like, what do you mean? I'm getting C's and D's. I'm consistent, yes, but that I want to be consistent there. I want to be consistent on the other end of the grade scale. And she said, no, the benefit of being consistent, we know what to fix. I can tell you that your mistakes exist around this particular area. So stay after school a few days a week for the next few weeks, and we can fix this issue. And that was probably an October conversation in the fall semester. And by the time we transitioned, I was an A student in that class.
Nice.
Because I had a consistent issue that she recognized. And instead of discounting it or just saying, okay, you're not good at math, we worked to fix it. And that has pivoted my career.
Right.
In my freshman year of undergrad, first year of undergrad, this is a story I hadn't told in a long time because I'm like, I should probably wait till I've achieved a little bit so you can see that you can overcome. I hit a similar bump because in high school I was good at math and science. Like I could study the right amount to get the grade I wanted, and it didn't. I thought it took effort, but in hindsight, it didn't take much effort, even in the AP Calc, AP Chem at that level, until I got to Purdue undergrad, and I was a chemistry major. Was a chemistry major, and undergrad chemistry one and Calc one were kicking my butt. And again, I'm studying, like I'm like, okay, I know I need to study hard and do all this stuff. And it wasn't clicking. I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm putting in the hours, 5, 6, 7 hours a night, multiple nights a week. And Ms. Julie Mills is my undergrad academic advisor at the time. She's since passed. And I was going to her, I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing wrong. Like I'm studying. You can't tell me I'm not reading the book. And she's like, well, how do you feel after you study? I said, I don't know. I've never really thought about how I felt after I studied. She's like, well, how do you feel after you take an exam? She said, I said, exhausted. Like I can't do much else, but maybe go and rest for the rest of the night. And she's like, that's how you should feel after a study session. She's like, you should be working your brain so much in those study sessions that you aren't looking at the clock to tell you when you're done. You're looking for when you can't really absorb much more information. And just like that fix landed me on the dean's list 3 semesters later, and has now been my weapon or my strategy for how I can study now. Like one of my strengths outside of chemistry, outside of programming, is my ability to learn because I know what I'm feeling for when I'm learning. I know that I'm looking for my brain to be so exhausted with absorbing information that maybe that's a 10-minute study session because I was working through this one paragraph. Maybe that's 2 hours because I was trying to get through an entire chapter. Um, but that process allowed me to learn all sorts of new things around chemistry, programming, data science, video editing, public speaking, and that's just been my strategy. And so in grad school, I got to Graham's lab, and he was a great advisor. Some of what he has said, and I know there have been others from his lab that have had, he has all these nuggets. But what I am keen on is the pattern that people use, right? Like one sort of simple example of how I think about this is when I was working on my YouTube channel, I would watch videos of people who teach you how to develop YouTube channels. And that was okay. Like they have strategies, but I found it more effective to look at people who built a channel. Like they weren't looking at teaching you how to build, they actually just did it and it was successful. And so I recall just watching how Graham moved. And at the time, I was in grad school from 2012 to 2017. And at the early point of that, it wasn't as common as it is now to have industrial funding as part of your support. It was primarily NSF, NIH, DOD, DOE, all that federal money. But for an academic lab at a prestigious institution to have private funders from various companies like L'Oreal and Merck and those sorts of companies where they have R&D needs, right. He was really at the forefront of writing proposals to those companies to get money for a semester to support some research and looking for all areas to innovate. I recall even in the early days of the clinical mass spec work where he and Livia and that generation of scientists were just at the forefront of determining if a piece of tissue was diseased or healthy. He was getting a lot of pushback early on with like, okay, what makes this tissue disease? Like, what are those chemical signals? And he's like, right now, we don't know, but we know it's reproducible. And with the models we're building, we can predict if this piece of tissue, this margin is either healthy or not healthy. And so it's just lots of ways of like looking at the early days of just direct advice. And then in my later days, just the pattern of people who were succeeding and not really broadcasting their success in a way, but just really just continue to be consistent in their own right and trying to model myself after that.
Yeah, that is so so incredible because it's almost like we're there is a poem, I think it says I'm a part of all that I have met. So it's almost like you pick up little bits from people that you interact with, people that you observe. But Chris, you are a real like keen observer and like you know yourself so well. I was fascinated to hear you talk about the way that you learn. And I was talking about this to a friend the other day is that I find that if I'm reading a book and I have the audio and the book in front of me at the same time, and I'm reading and I'm listening to it at the same time, it's an awesome technique for absorbing and retaining information. What were like you said, okay, so your prof told you you need to feel or you should feel exhausted when you're studying to get, I mean, like, because learning is just a daily thing, right? Like we shouldn't stop learning just because we're at a school and we should just learn all these different things. But like, look at you, man. You're doing videography or video editing and you're doing like content and like, right? And so you said did you just like go and study people whose channels were successful and what they were doing and how they were doing it and what kind of intros and like
Yeah.
what kind of content?
So I take things piecewise, right? Like, so early days, it was develop the skills. Like, what are technical skills I needed?
Yeah.
And then what folks don't see is I do a lot of studying, like a lot of studying.
Yes.
I actually enjoy the process of studying.
Yeah.
And so I recall, to answer your question, I recall in grad school, people were like, Chris, how do you know this? Because I would actually like by design, if we were having this conversation and it's more of a defense style and you're asking questions I don't know the answers to,
Yeah.
tonight, go and study. Tomorrow, find you again, bring that up. Hope you ask again, or hey, let's double click on this, just so I can be ready with an answer that would allow me to then elaborate more and offer some real perspective. And so I needed to then for the videos and how I handle everything else is like, okay, what are my priorities? When I was first trying to learn how to program in grad school, my priority was mass spec education, the chemistry, the foundational knowledge. It couldn't be programming. Like I just did not have that capacity at the time. Some people did, others didn't. And recognizing that's okay. I already have this expertise I'm developing. Once I had that expertise established, well, what is the thing that I can add to that that improves that skill set, that improves my employability, that improves my value to the team? Okay, well, by virtue of my field, I generate data. And this is really before maybe that steep slope with like data science becoming a thing, but just recognizing like, okay, this is coming regardless. It doesn't matter where you work, from HR to scientists to you name it. AI, data science will impact every aspect, even us lab scientists. And so it behooves a few of us, not everyone, to be at the forefront of that. Other folks have other interest areas. And then as I was developing the channel, I had the skills. I needed to work on some of the actual presenting part. I recall my first video, and I chose not to take this down. I was just testing out my first microphone. I was testing out the old camera I was using at the time. And I'm like, I'm just gonna push record. I already had some code written. Let me just push record so I can see myself later. And I just pushed record. I talked through the code. Actually, I didn't even have a camera at the time. It was just the audio. And I recall while recording thinking, okay, this is actually like not great. I have a lot to do to work on this. But then I played it back and I'm like, you know what? I was right. It's not great, but it's not terrible. And I think if I just chop out some of the ums and uhs and weird pauses, this is a reasonable first video. And to avoid myself overthinking, which I sometimes do, I'm like, I'm gonna just upload it. There's no expectation. I could easily do nothing, or I could exceed my low bar by just editing this video. The code is accurate. The what I'm saying is accurate, maybe not the most precise, and let that be video one. And if the bar is now that low, I could do video two, video three. And then my success criteria became more about my own pattern of work. Okay, Chris, before you invest in yourself, as far as hardware, software, 10 videos. Okay, Chris, before you make the next level of investment, 50 videos. And it wasn't even about the performance of the channel. I knew that would get better because then I could watch, okay, well, how do these other programming channels explain code? Okay, well, how did my professors explain this chemistry concept? Okay, well, why do I watch these particular channels? Like, what's so engaging about this person or this personality or this intro or this outro? Okay, well, why does mine not look like that? Like, what's different? Is it the camera? Is it my angle? And then I would piece together this thing whereby by video, I think I'm at 180 or 90 videos. Like, it starts to look fairly professional, but I can still see the path forward, but recognize, wow, you have come a long way. And just enjoying that process of work. And it mostly becomes about the stuff in my control. Like, I can't control how many people view the channel, but I can ensure that whatever I put out is as good as I can make it with the time and resources and education that I have at that moment, knowing that if I keep doing it, it'll get better. No, it has to, right? Like everything else we've done has improved with intentional effort. So that I really take that seriously.
Oh man, and it really it is getting better, and every episode is just like you can see, oh, it's more natural, it's more polished, it's awesome, man. I love that. And what's amazing is and I know how I'm trying to do it, meaning that it's a balancing act for doing your podcast, but you also have your daytime job that you're still doing in the meantime. And to be, to be putting it out there at the quality that you're putting it out there. I mean, it takes a lot of thought, a lot of study, maybe preparation, so that you're putting out this highest quality that you can. And I think it would be great to hear a little bit about how are you balancing it with your day job. And because I mean the senior scientist position that you have is I'm sure a very time consuming and commitment to making sure that you're also delivering the highest quality there as well. So tell us a little bit of your secret. How do you manage? I mean, I'm sure a little bit of your nights of weekends are doing your other thing, right? But tell us.
Yeah, yeah, no, that is true. Like to me, some of the stuff is so important that I have the passion to spend the extra time.
Yeah.
So before I could do any of this, I had to go through the upskilling process with Coursera. And before I asked PNG to sponsor my Coursera involvement, I actually paid for my own like first course. Like, okay, Chris, you're gonna pay for your first Python for data science beginner course. And that will be my own first investment so that if I don't finish it, no one knows. I didn't waste PNG's money, not that they're struggling for a $50 course. Or if I do, I have a certificate that I can say, hey, I completed this one and look what I can already do. Will you allow me to take more, but can you support it?
Mm.
It just so happened that as I was finishing my first one, the analytical group at PNG started this Coursera program. Like, what happened to I didn't know it was coming down the pipe. I was just ready. And so they announced it. I said, "Oh, I'm ready. I can take it. I'm ready to go." I took three so fast. I used like they each gave us three licenses. You just had to acknowledge that you're ready for them. I took three so fast. So like, well, we have more available if you want to use more licenses and continue. And then from there, I joined their Super Learners program, which allowed me, I think, 15 more licenses. And then when they unrolled the unlimited program, like you could just take anything in their data science, data analysis, data viz, programming, project management catalog. You just sign up and take it. And so I was doing this, and I was having significant impact at work,
Yeah.
but I wanted a way to sort of teach other folks how to do this with chemistry. And I realized that, okay, I think I'm okay with this teaching thing because I was helping other folks around me locally do it. But I wanted a way to also sort of store this information. Like, how do I record it? And how do I then share it more broadly in a way that doesn't infringe on PNG? Well, when I was upscaling early on, I would work my day job and then I would come home like a college student and then study again. And so I might work my 8 to 10 hour day and then come home and study Coursera courses for the next 2 hours to the point where I've taken probably 70 or 80. And then I wanted to then switch that time to, well, my learning is, I don't want to say it plateaued in Coursera because it laid a strong foundation, but I wanted a stronger emphasis in chemistry. I want to now apply these same data science skills, but for chemistry, measurement science specifically. And I'm like, well, there's all these ideas around what teaching people is the best way to learn. And it allowed me to also explore other Python libraries and concepts that I would never touch in my day job. Measuring the molecular similarity of, for instance, the FDA has called into question the effectiveness of phenylephrine in cough medicine mixtures.
Mm.
I would never have a reason to look at that in my day job, just by virtue of the type of work I do. But I'm like, how about I try to use Python to understand that? And so actually, if we can see it on like a continuum, there's phenylephrine that's somewhat effective, moderately effective, or ineffective in these cough medicines. There is pseudoephedrine, which is very effective and has the right balance of sort of effectiveness and side effects. And then there's the most extreme, which is methamphetamine, which is like the more, if we kind of continue this in line, I use Python to demonstrate how you go from one drug to this illicit drug, one pharmaceutical that's kind of on the weaker end to this sort of, and that then turned into me able to actually feed back into work. So I can't tell you how many videos where I just wanted something to teach. I wanted a reason to explore. And so I found a data set, wrote some code for it. And then maybe 2 months later, I needed to do something very similar to that at work. So I
Wow.
might have a question. Hey, how about, can you do this thing? And I was already ready. I was equipped because I could either watch my own video, which I've done many times, to see how my old self solved it, and then I would be ready at work to tackle this next thing. And it also allowed me to get better at explaining these complex concepts, because a lot of the pushback in my early upskilling days was less about the technical piece, but more about the communication
Right.
and learning that there's a new language you begin speaking as you go from just being a chemist to being a chemist and a data scientist. And sometimes where you're pulling your vocabulary from can really impact your ability to influence internally and externally. So it's been a process, but it definitely has been one where the hours sometimes it's going late at night, right? Like now I record most of my videos between the hours of 10 p.m. and midnight. The house is finally quiet. Um, I don't expect any of I have 3 young kids. My oldest is 5. They're usually sleep and definitely sleep by then. So there's no one that's gonna like walk into the video frame. But that's also been the time where even in grad school, that was my best study time. I try to be really available to people during the day. And so the only time I have to myself is usually that late night. It feels quiet. I know there's no distractions. I'm not checking my phone. I can really get into that deep focus where I can really rack my brain on some interesting concepts.
Wow, that's awesome. And what work ethic you have, like to keep it going. I love also this piece that you've been a lifelong learner, uh, per se, and that you found that by teaching, it was even more effective to learn what you were learning because you had to really get deep into it and be like, oh, I need to know what I'm talking about here. It's not just willy-nilly. And it's so neat, this whole story of Coursera and all of the courses that you've taken. But Chris, I've also you hear or you listen to different people out there, podcasters, or you read books of like what really helps you to succeed in life. And I think you're a true model that if you continue to invest in your self development, in your own knowledge, doors are going to continue to open up for you no matter where you are. Whether you're in industry or academia or government, the secret is to keep investing in yourself and learning new skills, new tools that you can use as the problems arise, because the problems will arise. You just don't know when. And if not the problems, the challenges, let's put them that way, where you will need to pull out a tool from your back pocket. And it's so neat to hear a personal account, and it's almost like in real time it's happened, and you can attribute to that being really the measurement of success here. I mean, you had to show your muscles, your chops in Procter and Gamble to really get up to the senior scientist, yeah, at whatever level, I would think.
Yeah, and there was a couple scary moments in that process because, as I mentioned before, when I started as a postdoc and then kind of got on my data science journey, all I was measuring was basically A/B test. How similar is A to B? And it was kind of just we could do it, we could eyeball it, but I was really trying to introduce this idea of measuring and quantitating these similarities. But then we had a project that really started phase 2 of my career, um, or this at least this career pivot into a more data centric role. And that was we were farming a particular botanical, and we were exploring the impact of geography. If we move our farm from one state to another state, what kind of impact do we have? Does that impact the safety profile of this material? And I was like, okay, that's a big question. That question is consequential. Um, I guess this is the time to use those skills. Like there's no other way. There is no overlay the chromatograms and let's see how they're different because they're going to be different. We know that it's well documented that harvest location, harvest season can have a chemical impact.
Yeah.
The question would be, what is the impact and what is the chemical nature of that impact? And so we looked at these materials. We had, let's say, 5 or 6 lots of material A from farm A and or material A from farm A and then material A from farm B. Everything was the same seeds, just planted in 2 different locations. And safety is like, what are the differences? And or no, are there differences? And if so, what are they? And then they would do their safety assessment on it. And so we get the study, we get the materials, and we're like, oh, this is complex. And I knew right away this is a skill set that required, okay, now our project where I need to use my data science skills if it were going to succeed. There's no way it doesn't without it. And I was ready. It was strange, right? Like I'm double checking everything in a way that I've never scrutinized because the output of this is going to kill a project or allow it to continue forward. Either way, we've already spent a bunch of money. By the time we get to this point, money has been spent. This has been a project in our pipeline for several years at this point. And I needed to be confident that whatever the outcome was, it wasn't because of a typo in the code or a bug in the code, or it wasn't because of a misinterpretation of the results. And I worked the problem. There were a few issues around design. And things had to come together as we started thinking about data science. So the infrastructure had to sort of be worked out. But by the time we had our answer, it was clear and we could show it visually. We didn't have to overly wordsmith this complex answer because we needed you to see that this small peak here didn't matter, but this other peak did. We could actually model the pattern. We can actually see that when you sort of take what is a representative sample or set of samples from this farm and the other farm, the small differences that are random sort of fall away, and those differences that are really consistent with the location appear. And turns out that chemically, they're actually remarkably similar. And where they did differ, we could show that it was actually part of our own processing changes that happened between the 2 farms, not the endogenous plant material. And so with that, safety was allowed to move this project forward. And once we sort of wrote that story up internally, it has really spawned a new area of work where we have sort of 3 tiers. We have analytical work that can be done by the business. P&G is a really large corporation. I sit in the corporate function center, but beauty care has their own teams, healthcare has their own teams, family home care have their own teams. And so usually those teams can handle most of the problems. The big ones where they don't have the right instrumentation then come to the analytical team. And then of those, the ones that have a sufficiently complex data problem come to me. And by the time it gets to that point, so many folks have looked at it or tried different things, and needing to be ready with the right skills to answer the question and ensure that that answer is valid requires a lot of things to go well. And then that you have a message that can be heard by the audience, which again, usually safety folks, usually other analytical chemists, usually somebody else outside of your specialty, and ensuring that that message of yes or no or good versus bad and whatever evidence is clear, even as you learn a new language by which to articulate that message.
Yeah, that's and incredible. I love the way that you just took me around to come to that final message, because it's again, like it's an inspiring story that just lets us peer into your incredible work ethic too. It's like, Chris, you don't, I would I would be surprised if you told me, well, I watch TV, a lot of TV, because I think you're mostly learning and working and like doing all this awesome stuff. What keeps you motivated? I know we spoke a lot about learning and we spoke about that, but like, what's your thrill? What's that like at midnight? You finish recording that video and Is it the I'm exhausted now. Now I can get to rest. I can get to sleep. What's the work ethic motivation? What is it that you get off on?
You know what's interesting? It's funny you bring up the TV specifically. I probably went almost 18 months without watching TV. You would maybe the exception of like vacation where like, I was out not working for a week, and so I
Right.
could finally pull myself away and feel comfortable watching TV. But with my full day, it starts with getting the kids to school. That
Yeah.
has most of the middle part with my work day. Then I pick the kids up, but then at this point, there's not a lot of time to either do the part that I really find joy in, which is learning or publishing or editing or coding, and the next day.
Yeah.
And so there, even now, I watch a little bit because I'm like, okay, I have to find some time to allow my brain to rest where I'm not just sleeping. And so if I'm doing chores, I might like watch NCIS. I love like
Yes.
solve it kind of crime shows. But I do get a satisfaction with building an idea, building. So in grad school, right at the tail end, I had this some IP around this reaction monitoring idea, this idea from Genentech that I then went and developed some IP around in the publication, and again the bulk of my thesis. And I had tried to start a company with this idea, but with how late I started in grad school and how inexperienced I was with actually building a team, like I knew scientists, I didn't know business people. I didn't know that I needed to know business people. And so we've got all these folks who can really help design the chemistry, but no one to help us design a business. And so I put that aside, that particular idea as a business aside, but not that drive to build my own idea.
Mm.
And so inside of P&G, I've prided myself on being one of the thought leaders in this analytical data science space, this space that to some makes a lot of sense and is the obvious next direction. To others, they need more convincing that this is the next step or a step for certain projects and ideas. Um, but nevertheless, trying to influence those people too to identify where we need to apply this skill set, what needs to be true as far as sample management, data labeling, metadata, design of experiments, the output, the report, the stakeholders, but also externally, because I didn't want everything that I do to only exist within the walls of P&G, and I can't share that. And so I almost put on a separate hat where none of the data I access is on my P&G computer. Everything I do has to be accessible from like a public, my own personal computer resources so that there's no overlap. But that clear separation has allowed me to learn something new about what it's like trying to do science from the outside in. I've always had this privilege of access to research journals from my time as an undergrad at Purdue through my career at P&G. But now as an outsider, I'm like, man, I don't. How do you find data? How do you practice this? How do you learn what is at the cutting edge of science if it's not published in an open source journal or by a bigger news article? And that's given me a new appreciation. So I've really found an area where I'm really trying to gain more understanding, like near infrared spectroscopy. And that's
Mhm.
because, like my dissertation stated, I like doing analytical chemistry outside the lab. Let's go and find where those samples exist. Look at the trees, look at the fruit, look at skin, look at a surface to determine is it chemically clean or not, or what was it cleaned with, and now pairing that idea with data science, but from the perspective as an ordinary guy. Well, I still have a PhD, but I want to have the same level of access that any typical person would if they were looking in this area. And that perspective has allowed me to become a much better communicator in P&G, outside of P&G. It's allowed me to connect with people that I would have never crossed paths with. Um, from current graduate students to folks at the longer end of their career, folks in mid career, early career, you know, folks where I'm getting messages about, oh, hey, this video helped me on this project, or I don't know if this is possible, or hey, can we talk? Because I think we might be able to link up and design some stuff together. And just that possibility of you never know what that next video might do or what that next idea might help or who it might help, both within the company but in the broader scientific community. we were interviewing someone for a position a few months ago, and I didn't know this person. I just went to the talk, asked a few questions as one of the technical leads. And after the interview or after his presentation, he's like, "Hey, are you the guy on LinkedIn that makes those videos?" I said, yeah,
Yeah.
I guess. Um, and it's just really cool to have that reach. And that's kind of how I see Pathfinder. Um, I know you mentioned you interviewed Nick. I didn't know at first. I mean, he eventually told me, but then I just started seeing like, what is this? What?
Yeah.
It's just such a really cool way to democratize science
Yeah.
before it gets to, I mean, CRISPR is great. The breakthroughs are wonderful, but there's so many things between CRISPR and everyday stuff that I think also has an interesting story, particularly one that has stuck with me is when I was starting at P&G, they have a whole bunch of new hire talks, and they usually bring in senior technologists, senior managers, the folks who have made it. And one of the talks that stuck with me the most was this guy who said he was told no on this project, went in the lab anyway and did it. Had some cover from people that could help kind of like keep people away while he developed this idea, and this idea became a $1 billion brand.
Wow. Wow.
And that idea, the fact that like if you have an idea or vision and you have enough conviction to go after it, even in with some opposition, then go for it, right? But the wisdom I took from that was he had enough people who supported him to give him enough space to incubate this idea. And I think there are lots of areas where if you could see those people before they become those people, that story is so much more interesting because I want to know how you dealt with that resistance. I have dealt with some resistance and my integration of measurement science and data science by some folks who take a very traditional approach and folks who say, well, these mass specs can already solve those problems. But there is still a spot where you never know where that next big idea comes from.
Mm.
And seeing people who are still sort of stirring in that pot, trying to responsibly or constructively disrupt the current status quo is just such an interesting area. And those aren't the people that are really talking about it, but those are the people I'm looking for and modeling how I want to then move as I eventually get to the point where I become that person for someone else.
Yeah. Yeah. So awesome. And again, like so inspiring, Chris, because when you can reciprocate that back, when you can be that person to somebody else, you realize, oh, I am doing something that is impactful. I am doing something that is important. At least it resonated with one person. If anything, I've made a change in one person's life. It's been awesome talking to you. And I think we could talk all day long. I could really stay on this thing for a lot more hours. I hope we can catch up with you again soon and continue hearing about your wonderful career and your success and your personal development, because really what a lesson it has been and what a model you are for that. I see that as being really a great theme in this conversation, is that you just have to keep focusing on what you can do best, on your passions, and even going through the math challenges and all the stuff. You're math whiz. you're you're a statistical genius and you didn't even know it. But thank you so much, Christopher Pulliam, who's a senior scientist, analytical data scientist at Procter and Gamble. Thank you for being our Pathfinder today, and thank you for giving us so much of your wisdom for today's interview.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you for your time.
Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us once again, and remember to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel.